Service monitoring is our external attack service management, or EASM, product that ensures complete coverage of your full attack surface. And it ensures we monitor and map all the different assets and subdomains. It ensures you get an understanding of what assets you have and how that is changing over time and what specifically is changing. And it also ensures that we can find misconfigurations and vulnerabilities across your growing attack surface. And the way you can set up service monitoring and configure it, all of that you do from the service monitoring page, which we have here. It lists all the root assets that you have on your attack surface, and it allows you to configure monitoring on that level, and that will then propagate down into all subdomains. A root asset is typically an apex domain, but it can also be a subdomain if that's the highest level of the hierarchy that you've added. But for most cases, it's going to be an apex domain. And this is also the place where you can find all those roots and which are verified and which are not verified, so that you can you know what action you need to take. If it's unverified, that's something you should be verifying. And once that's done, you can start enabling monitoring for that. And monitoring with surface monitoring is very easy. Simply click Enable Monitoring, and you can then just go ahead and start monitoring with just one click. That's the typical case. In most situations, that's enough. But there are some things that we will go into now, that how you can configure and change the behavior of this monitoring. And this will also be a great opportunity for me to talk about the different parts of service monitoring and show you how those can be changed, but also what is part of service monitoring. So what we can see here for this specific route and all its subdomains in this case, these are the different options we have. And some things service monitoring does that's not part of the settings, and I'll mention them separately. So one thing that service monitoring does, or you could sort of divide it up in two different parts. One part is the discovery or the reconnaissance, and the second part is the vulnerability assessment. So I'm going to start with the discovery. This will populate all the data about your attack surface. And the first step there is subdomain discovery. And this is something we do so that whatever you've already imported into Detectify, your known assets, will also ensure to cover whatever you don't know. So this is an important step and the first thing that we'll do once it's enabled. Then we'll start to add more information about those domains. So whatever DNS records we can find, whatever IPs that those DNS records resolve to, and whatever ports that are exposed on those domains. And once we know that, we will also tell you about information about the SSL and TLS configuration and the certificates there. And that's something you can also adjust from the settings, whether you want to run that or not. And all of this discovery data will be found under Attack Surface in the Insight section of the menu. And here you can dive into all the different assets, but also the different sections here that I mentioned, like IP addresses, ports, and technologies. And if we go into the second section here, the vulnerability assessment, that's really the power of service monitoring. So the first thing is subdomain takeover assessment. And this is something we pioneered 10 years ago in one of our products, and something we've developed closely with our biggest clients. And so this will look for CNAME or dangling CNAMEs and such vulnerabilities that allow for takeovers of subdomains that might be forgotten on your attack surface. So this is a very, very powerful tool to ensure that doesn't happen and reduce the likelihood of someone using your sites for phishing attacks. The second part here is the SSL and TLS assessment. This will look for misconfigurations in the TLS setup. And this can be configured here quite in a detailed way using passive and active tests. The passive ones will just use the data from the SSL TLS discovery. So it's just normal TLS handshakes, normal behavior basically of a web browser. Nothing intrusive there at all. But we also have some active tests that will do some more detailed checks as part of this assessment. And the last bit here is the certificate assessment, which will look at SSL certificates you have and whether some of those are expired or if there's some misconfiguration in that setup, which might affect availability, especially very important for where that is a key factor in your business. And the really important or juicy tests, which are the stateless tests. These are the payload-based HTTP tests that we run towards your web apps. And this is really where our crowdsourced network that continuously send in new tests to our engines and really can sort of make or really can shine, because we run service monitoring assessment daily. So if there's anything new out there that are being exploited by malicious hackers, we can, through our crowdsourced network, get those tests in, and we can run them as quickly as possible to ensure that you know about it before anyone else can start exploiting that. And you can configure it a little bit more if you want to add specific headers so that you know that if you want to get through a firewall or if you want to know about the origin of this. And you can also select a specific request per second limit if you have older infrastructure that might be sensitive to a lot of requests coming in. But usually the no limit is the recommendation. It will basically be one machine running a lot of requests, so that's typically going to work for modern surfaces. But it's there to allow you some options if you see some issues on your end. But that's our surface monitoring product, how you can configure it. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what you can expect from the results once you start running that. So once you turn it on, we're going to immediately start populating assets and IP addresses and ports and technologies. Usually that goes pretty quickly, but then there's a bunch of tests that will be run. So you can expect vulnerabilities to be added continuously, but give it some time to run fully and properly. But there should be data starting to be populated just within a few minutes, but some vulnerabilities will surely take up to an hour or sometimes even a little bit more. So give it some time to populate fully. But if it's gone a day and you see results that you think are a little bit weird, there are some things that can go wrong. And it depends a little bit on what provider you use for any of your hosting. And it's quite common there are certain providers that block tools like ours, like a DAST or an ESM tool. And since we will always say, we will always come from certain IPs so that you can control that fully. And we will also let them know in a header that Detectify is doing the scans. And this is to ensure that you know what's going on and it's not something malicious that's happening. And if you have a provider that you think might be blocking our traffic, then it's always good to check in that tool and ensure that you allow list our IP addresses. And you can read more about that on the knowledge base, which IP addresses that we will be using in our products. So that's important to know about, and it's good to check that If you have any further questions, always feel free to reach out to our support.